Today we will begin the second chapter, and the last chapter ended with a sermon and therefore introduced the religious theme. And the first sentence of the second chapter, this austere teaching found my soul ready prepared and naturally predisposed to duty. So the austere teaching referred to here is a kind of puritanical religious faith in France, which was called Jansenism. I am writing in the chat box. So it was there right from the 17th century. The French playwright Racine was a Jansenist. The Jansenists were like Puritans of England. They were very austere in their conception of Christian faith, and we will have more of this later. And without understanding this ambience of Jansenism that Gide builds here, we will not be properly able to understand the characters or the actions. Now, in this chapter, something significant will happen. Jerome's mother will die. Thus, leaving Jerome to his purposes alone, kind of pushing him into an early adulthood. But in this chapter, Jerome is still 14 years old. So it is not until the end of the novel that we will see Jerome to be fully adult. And therefore we have to understand this novel as a delineation of adolescent love. And even in adolescent love, Gide offers several kinds of that love. Among the different love relationships or love pursuits in this novel, and all the characters are more or less adolescent. Elisa, Juliet, Jerome, Abel, and so on. So Jerome says, no doubt like all boys of 14, I was still unformed and pliable, but my love for Elisa soon urged me further and more deliberately along the road on which I had started. So what is this road on which he started? Obviously it is not the conventional kind of love where physical demands are most urgent, but there is a lot of talk of virtue, of religion, of even salvation, sanctification, and so on and so forth in this relationship between Jerome and Elisa. However, we will see that in Jerome's narration, here we still have Jerome's narration, where we look at the character of Elisa through Jerome's eyes. In Jerome's narration, Jerome appears to be eager to have an engagement with Elisa or wanting to marry her, whereas Elisa appears to be very cold, always refusing him. But this is just one version, because Gide will offer us Elisa's version later in the novel through her diary, where Jerome will read and know that Elisa had as much physical desire, urgency, sexual desire as Jerome, but she did not express it, or she did not make those demands, because she thought that she was helping Jerome in becoming a saint and thus sacrificing her own pleasure. Alright, but that knowledge will come to us later. Therefore, this novel will never be fully comprehensible at the first reading. So only when we read it for the second time, we come back with our knowledge, with our hindsight, then we begin to understand the first chapters. A sudden inward illumination made me acquainted with myself. I saw myself as a brooding, half-fledged, wistful creature, somewhat careless of others, somewhat unenterprising, and with no ambitions save for such victories as are to be gained over self. So he is reflecting on himself and on his growing personality, a personality that is yet to be fully formed. And this kind of writing inevitably reminds us of James Joyce's stream of consciousness technique, particularly in Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, where we have Stephen's psyche rendered through his own understanding of himself. And in both cases, the authors represent adolescent psyches, which means that psyches which are in development. And in both the novels, the desire, the question of desire, the question of sexuality become important, which is realistic, because in any human life in the adolescence, people always feel a greater urge towards sexual desire because of the growth and development and the surging hormones. Therefore, to that extent, these novels are realistic. At the same time, in both the novels, there is an attempt to sublimate this sexuality or the sexual desire in portrait through art, in Straight is the Gate through religion. In portrait also religion has a great role to play. However, even though we do not compare the novel with another novel, we see that Ries' perspective takes us both inward and outward. So now we are moving inward into Jerome's psyche, and then when Jerome will travel and write about his experience, that would be an outward journey. One of the important parts of growing up is making friends. And as we have seen from the interaction between Jerome and Elisa, that they are very literary. So we may assume that Jerome will not have many friends. However, he makes friends of Abel Vautier, who studied in the same school in Paris with him, who was the fourth child of the pastor who read the sermon, and the pastor who was the who had adopted Lucille. So that we have been told in the last chapter. I made friends, however, with Abel Vautier, who the following year joined me in Paris and was in my form at school. He was an agreeable, indolent boy, for whom I had more liking than esteem. So he always has a lower esteem for others, mainly because they are not as literary as Elisa, or they do not have that kind of depth. But at any rate he was someone with whom I could talk about Fonguzmar and Le Havre, where my thoughts were continually flying. So even though he was living in Paris, but he was constantly thinking about Fonguzmar, where his cousins Elisa, Juliet, they all lived, and Le Havre, where his aunt lived. So from Abel he gets to know about the news. And then the youngest brother of Elisa and Juliet was Robert. This character is also introduced as a kind of a contrast to the other siblings. As for my cousin Robert Bucolin, who had been sent to the same school, he was 2 forms below us, and I saw him only on Sundays. If he had not been the brother of my cousins, whom however he was very unlike, I should have taken no pleasure in his society. So from Jerome's point of view, Robert was very ordinary. The only fact that he was Elisa's brother, that made him think about him or know him, but otherwise he was very unlike the others. I was at that time entirely engrossed by my love, and it was in its light alone that these 2 friendships had any importance for me. Now, Abel Gautier will become important, as we will see later, that he will fall in love with Juliet, and unlike Jerome, he proposes very quickly, and he wants to be engaged and everything. He wants to do everything very quickly. And when he traces Juliet, then he discovers that Juliet loved Jerome. Therefore, Abel Gautier would be an important character in this scheme of love, rejection, and remorse. Elisa was the pearl of great price of which the gospel spoke, and I was like him who went and sold all that he had to buy. So Jerome had this kind of religious reading, I won't say training, but reading, because of which he judged his own life by referring to the Gospels, to the Bible, and he thought that Elisa was the pearl of great price, the greatest reward in life, for which he was ready to give everything. Child as I still was, am I wrong in talking of love and in giving this name to the feeling I had for my cousin? A question, or we may say self-questioning, whether a child like him would speak of love, whether that love was a serious love, whether that love would be seen as love in the eyes of society. Sometimes we only say that it is calf love, when little boys and girls, or very young boys and girls fall in love. We do not give that any importance. We call it calf love. But for Jerome, this emotion was very strong, and so strong that his whole being was being guided by it, and he was trying to think whether he was wrong in feeling love for his cousin or talking about love for his cousin. As you know that love for cousins or marriage with cousins is acceptable in Europe and in England. Therefore, it is not the issue that Elisa was his cousin, but the question was whether his love for Elisa was justifiable or not. Nothing that I experienced later seems to me worthier of that name. So to be a lover of Elisa appeared to him to be the most worthy title to have. And moreover, when I became old enough to suffer from the more definite qualms of the flesh, my feeling did not greatly change in character. So here we have this subtle Freudian insinuation. The author exposes this inevitable rise of libido in the character as he reaches his adolescence. But even though in adolescence one feels the greatest sexual desire, yet Jerome says that the character of his love did not change much for Elisa. Therefore, the kind of spiritual value that Jerome assigned to this love, that always remained there, even though to it the physical desire was also added. I never sought more directly to possess her, whom as a child I had sought only to deserve. Works, efforts, pious acts, I offered them all up mystically to Elisa. Now you see that these are the things that Christians offer to God. Works, efforts, pious acts. Roman Catholics particularly believe in works, in charity. There are these two covenants, the covenant of work and the covenant of grace as conceptualized in Christian theology. The covenant of work is what we find in the Old Testament. That is, people, if they worship properly, if they worship the right God and they do charitable work and live life piously, then they are rewarded by God. That is the covenant of work. In the New Testament, it is replaced by the covenant of grace, where Calvin and the other reformers suggested in their interpretation of the New Testament that to be rewarded for work is a blasphemy. It is not what God demanded, because God's grace is inscrutable. So anybody can receive grace, even though we humans cannot judge. So even a pious man may not receive grace, and even a person who is apparently not a good man may receive God's grace. So it is the covenant of grace that replaces. So here we have reference to works, efforts, pious acts, which Christians offer to God. But in Jerome's mind, God was replaced by Elisa. So he offered all these things to Elisa and wanted to be worthy of her. And that is why we have here the word mystically, because mysticism is a deviation from the true Christian path. Mysticism is slightly different. Elisa and indeed invented a refinement of virtue by which I often left her in ignorance of what I had done only for her sake. So Jerome constantly thought about his own virtue and how he could refine himself to make himself worthy of Elisa, and he won't let Elisa know what he did for her. Now we have a description of Elisa, because these are the early chapters where the characters are described. They are always described through the eye of another character mostly. So here Elisa is described through Jerome's eyes. Was I alone to feel the spur of emulation? I do not think that Elisa was touched by it, or that she did anything for my sake or for me, though all my efforts were only for her. Jerome thought that Elisa did not have the same kind of attitude towards him. Everything in her unaffected and artless soul was of the most natural beauty. So, if we look at the words used here to describe Elisa, unaffected, artless, natural. Her virtue seemed like relaxation, so much there was in it of ease and grace. So there was nothing artificial about Elisa. Her virtue could be read in her face, in her conduct, and she held herself gracefully. The gravity of her look was made charming by her childlike smile. I recall that gently and tenderly inquiring look as she raised her eyes, and can understand how my uncle in his distress sought support and counsel and comfort from his elder daughter. I recall, so that reminds the reader that this is being narrated by an adult Jerome, a grown-up Jerome, after the death of Elisa, and he is remembering Elisa of his childhood days. And here we have the reference to Elisa's charming smile and her inquisitive look. These will be referred to later again, through a flashback when the meeting with Jerome after his travels, when Jerome meets Elisa, then he discovers the same smile, even though Elisa was much changed. Therefore, these are the features which are kind of tagged with Elisa, by which we again remember Elisa later. Here Jerome talks about Elisa giving his father comfort. His father was in distress because his wife abandoned him. So as his elder daughter, she comforted him. He remained smoking in his study until the hour of the evening when Elisa would go to fetch him. He had to be persuaded to go out. She led him off to the garden like a child. Now here comes an incident in the garden. So in the garden there are some steps, and there is a level below the steps. If somebody sits there or lies there, that person cannot be seen, and from that position one may overhear. And this is the device that Reed uses a number of times in this novel, the device of overhearing. So when Elisa brings her father to the garden and they were talking, Jerome overheard them. And there are later occasions when Elisa overhears Jerome and Juliet and so on. So how is overhearing helpful to the author? Because if the author wants a character to know something which the character does not know, somehow that information must reach the character. And overhearing is a good device by which the character comes to know about it. So here Elisa and Mr. Bucola, they were talking about Jerome, or Elisa asked her father about Jerome's father. Papa, was Uncle Palissy a remarkable man? My uncle's voice was low and indistinct. I could not make out his answer. Elisa insisted, very remarkable, do you think? Again in an inaudible answer, and again Elisa's voice, Jerome is clever, isn't he? How could I help straining to hear? But no, I could make out nothing, she went on. So Jerome could not hear everything, but more or less, got hold of the strain, got hold of the idea what they're talking about. Do you think he will become a remarkable man? Here my uncle raised his voice, which means that Jerome would be able to hear. First, my dear, I should like to understand what you mean by remarkable. One can be very remarkable without it showing, at any rate in the eyes of men, very remarkable in the eyes of God. So being remarkable in the eyes of men and in the eyes of God are not the same things. So what do you mean by remarkable? That is worldly achievement or saintly, achievement? Yes, that is what I mean, said Elisa. That is in the eyes of God. And then one can't tell yet, he is too young. Yet certainly he is very promising, but that is not enough for success. So promise, success, all these refer not to worldly success but to spiritual success in this household. So here spirituality is always more important than worldly success. And as they were discussing Jerome's future, what will Jerome be in future? He will turn out to be a writer of plays. And even though in their adolescence Jerome and Elisa both were avid readers of literature, we will see that later as Elisa becomes more and more religious, she stops reading secular literature. And therefore Jerome becoming a playwright, that won't count much as a success to her eyes from that point of view. But all that I speak from a hindsight. So here they think that Jerome is full of promise. What more must there be? Oh my child, I can hardly tell. There must be confidence, support, love. What do you mean by support? Interrupted Elisa. The affection and esteem that have been lacking to me, answered my uncle sadly, and then their voices finally died away. So the uncle meant that in order to arrive at spiritual success also, one needs the support and love of somebody, which he did not receive because his wife abandoned him. So we can see the dimension of his loss. His loss was not merely for the worldly discomforts when the wife abandons the husband, but to him it was a spiritual discomfort, a loss which could not be compensated for by anybody else. A wife's spiritual support and love, that is required, he thought, for spiritual success. So like a good Christian, he thought about salvation. In Hindu tradition also, it is believed that a wife is a great support in the spiritual journey of the husband. So where this dialogue ends, it obviously leads us to this idea. It leads us to question, would Jerome have any such love and support? And then the reader would make the equation that if Jerome has received any such love or support, it would be received from Elisa. Therefore Elisa's questions to her father were meant for trying to understand what should be their future way of operations. So when Jerome next met her, he told her that how he overheard them, and he wanted to know everything that that was discussed. And Elisa said that, but Jerome, it's very wrong to listen like that. You ought to have told us you were there, or else to have gone away. Really, I didn't listen. I just overheard you without meaning to. Jerome, she said, laughing, you heard perfectly well. You were just making me repeat it for your amusement. So Jerome wants Elisa to say that she was asking about him. When he spoke of support in life, I answered that you had your mother. And then Jerome says, oh Elisa, you know I shan't always have her. And then it is not the same thing. So love and support from a mother is not the same as love and support from a partner. So that does not really help towards the spiritual journey. She bent her head. That is what he said too. Which means that even her father said that it is your duty to provide him this love and support. I took her hand trembling. Whatever I hope to become later is for you. But Jerome, I may leave you too. My soul went into my words. I shall never leave you. Now, this dialogue appears to be very sentimental, but I suppose it is appropriate for lovers as young as Jerome and Elisa. And the question of, I suppose that there is some kind of an indication what will happen in the future. That Elisa will leave Jerome in the sense that she will die. But that can be read only with hindsight. At the moment, we just take these words, at their plain value. Aren't you strong enough to walk alone? We must each of us find God by ourselves, but you must show me the way. So Jerome wants Elisa to show him the way. Why? Which means that Jerome is not fully confident of himself and he wants to be led by somebody. Somewhat like Dante being led by Beatrice in heaven. If you have any comments to make, you can, It is being a kind of a monologue. Do you have any comments or questions at this stage? Why do you want any other guide but Christ? Do you think we are ever nearer to each other than when each of us forgets the other as we pray to God? Yes, I interrupted, that He may unite us. That is what I asked Him morning and evening. Don't you understand what communion in God means? So Elisa wants Jerome to practice true religion by praying to God and seeking communion with God. That is, merging one's soul with God, Holy Communion, through Holy Communion. But that is not what Jerome sought. Jerome always prayed that they might be united. He always wanted to have Elisa as his partner and wife. So, in one sense, it is a worldly desire, a desire to have a particular person. So, you see that there is some kind of contradiction here. On the one hand, Elisa proposes a very austere Christian religion and practice. On the other hand, we see Jerome's love for Elisa is so deep that he cannot think of any religion beyond that love. So Elisa says that then your worship is not pure. So if you are worshipping, desiring me to be united with you, then it is not a pure worship. She put her fingers on her lips and answered with some solemnity, "Seek you first the kingdom of God and His righteousness." So Here Jerome writes that when I think of these conversations now, then they appear to be very childlike. And he says that they used to read the Latin Bible. We had procured the Gospels in the Vulgate and knew long passages of them by heart. Alisa had learnt Latin with me under the plea of helping her brother, but really I think in order to follow me in my reading, and indeed I could hardly bring myself to take pleasure in any study in which I knew she would not keep me company. So they wanted to read everything together, and Jerome did not take any pleasure in reading something that Alisa won't read. So you see how reading becomes an act of companionship. And Latin Vulgate becomes the excuse for their companionship. But the course of my mind pursued was always shaped with reference to her, and what preoccupied us at the time, what we called thought, was often merely the pretext for some more subtle communion, merely the disguise of feeling, merely the covering of love. So here we have a very interesting comment or suggestion. That is, what appeared to them as thought, that was actually a feeling, an emotion, or in disguise love. So this intellectual pretense or the facade of intellectuality, reading books together, explaining them, interpreting them, this was nothing. This did not lead to any serious thought, but it actually concealed the feeling of love. Alright, so do you think that it is possible that what young people think as intellectual exercise, that is actually a camouflage for the passion of love? Alright, so you have no comment to make on this. Now, why I was talking about this, the word projected here, thought. You know that later Alisa will become a great reader of Pascal, and Pascal's famous book is called Les Pensées. Pensée means thought. There would be an acute accent on the first E. Jansenism depends a lot upon intellectuality. It has a very intellectual quality, and Pascal, as a Jansenist writer, names his work thought. Therefore, thought, how that embraces religion, how religion imbibes thought, that is very significant for Jansenism. So here we just have a hint when Jerome uses this word thought. He says that I thought that what we were exercising were exercises in thought, but actually those were not exercises in thought, but those were in disguise, feeling, desire, love. One day Jerome has a conversation with his mother just before she passes away, and by this time his mother is very sick, and so they want to have a conversation. She calls him and says, I am getting very old, someday I shall leave you suddenly. She stopped, her breathing was very difficult, then I broke out irresistibly, With what it seemed to me, she was expecting me to say, "Mama, you know I want to marry Alisa." And my sentence was no doubt the continuation of her secret thoughts, for she went on at once, "Yes, that is what I want to speak to you about, my Jerome." "Mama," said I, sobbing, "you do think she loves me, don't you?" "Yes, my child," and several times she repeated tenderly, "Yes, my child. You must leave it to the Lord." So, even her mother thought that Jerome and Alisa, they would be united in future. Later we come to know that before her death, Jerome's mother wanted to speak to Alisa. But for some reason Alisa could not come or did not come, and therefore that dialogue did not happen. So we may assume that if Alisa came, then she would have extracted some kind of confession from her or some kind of promise from her that she would continue loving Jerome. But Alisa did not come. One may suspect that was deliberate. She did not come and did not have this last conversation with her aunt. Why? So we may assume that Alisa was already in trouble or divided in mind about her love for Jerome. And later we will learn the reason for her hesitation or her confusion. That is, she came to know that Juliet loved Jerome. And maybe that is what that prompted her not to go to Jerome's mother, because she would find it very difficult to not to make this promise that she would want at her deathbed. And at the same time, she won't be able to make this promise because she knew that her sister loved Jerome. But all these are not explained, and these are left to the reader to understand and to interpret. My mother passed away very quietly one evening while Miss Ashburton and I were with her. The final attack which carried her off had not at first seemed worse than the preceding ones. It was only toward the end that it became alarming, and we had no time to send for any of our relations. It was with our old friend that I watched the first night beside my dear mother's body. I loved my mother deeply and wondered that in spite of my tears, I should feel so little sadness. So Jerome, having this vigil beside his dead mother's body, realized that even though he loved his mother deeply, he did not feel as much sadness as he should have. If I wept, it was out of pity for Miss Ashburton, whose friend, so many years younger than herself, had thus been taken by God before her. So, ironically, it was Miss Ashburton who was more saddened and needed to be consoled than Jerome. Now one may ask, why didn't Jerome feel as sad as he should have? Jerome himself provides some kind of an answer. The secret thought that this bereavement would hasten an understanding with my cousin greatly predominated over my grief. So he thought that the passing away of his mother would now compel Elisa to quickly come to a decision about their engagement, and that made him inwardly happy and reduced the grief for his mother. Now it may sound a little odd, but this is how it happens in real life, because people's emotions go in several directions, and when one emotion is very strong, then the other emotions tend to be, suppressed. So in this case, Jerome's love and desire for Elisa was so strong that his sadness for his mother was reduced. Then Jerome received this letter from Elisa. "Jerome, my friend, my brother," she wrote, "how grieved I am not to have been able to speak those few words to her before her death, which would have given her that great happiness she desired. May she forgive me now, and may God alone guide us both henceforward. Goodbye, my poor friend. I am more tenderly than ever yours, Elisa." So, the letter is all about the conversation that did not take place. And Jerome could not make head or tail of it. What could be the meaning of this letter? What were those words that she was grieved not to have uttered? What could they be but those with which she would have plighted our future? I was still so young, however, that I dared not ask her for her hand at once. And besides, what need had I of her promise? Were we not already as good as engaged? Our love was no secret from our relations. My uncle was no more opposed to it than my mother had been. On the contrary, he treated me already as a son. So Jerome thought that that his relationship with Elisa was more or less accepted by everybody and taken for granted. Therefore, a formal engagement was strictly not that important. But as we will see, that Jerome was not always correct in his assumptions. He did not understand the world very well. Like any young boy, he was very confused. And particularly in matters of love, boys are extremely confused. And we will see that Aunt Felicie comes and starts living at Fungusmark after Jerome's mother's death. She kind of tries to fill that vacuum, left by Jerome's mother. And she thought that Jerome loves Juliet. And when Jerome protests and says that no, it is not Juliet that I love, it is Elisa, then she is confused. And therefore, what Jerome thinks here, that it was the public perception that Jerome and Elisa were in love and everybody accepted it. That was not true. So I will stop here for 2-3 minutes. I will come back.